The following program is an original production of WYCC PBS Chicago.
Good evening. I'm Chris Bury.
And I'm Barbara Pinto. Welcome to In the Loop, a special presentation on immigration reform.
Here in Chicago and across the country, a debate rages about the legal status of immigrants. A bill that makes it easier to become an American citizen passed the Senate but stalled in the Republican-controlled House.
President Obama has pushed for reform, but some Republicans say they don't trust him to control the borders, even though the Obama administration has aggressively deported undocumented immigrants.
As a result, the president's approval rating among Latinos has dropped 20 points. The Republican Party is divided by the issue, and 11 million undocumented people remain in political limbo. Tonight, we explore how the battle over reform has hit the Chicago area as immigrants here strive to share in the American dream. 1 year ago, the chants of nearly 1,000 Chicagoans rang out, marching from the city's west side to the Loop in support of immigration rights and a new path to American citizenship.
Today, you're part of history again. This is the fourth time that undocumented people take the stage and declare themselves as undocumented and unafraid and unapologetic.
Protesters said they were angry over the slow pace of immigration reform. One of the organizers, the pastor of a church in the Little Village neighborhood, had harsh words for the president.
President Obama is a liar. He has been just rhetorical, and he has not been practiced what he says.
One major sore point is the record number of deportations during the Obama administration. According to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, more than 400,000 people were deported in 2012, the most of any year in the nation's history. That's a 3% increase from the previous year. 55% of those deported were convicted criminals. According to reform supporters, deportations tear families apart. Too often, they say, working parents are deported, leaving spouses and children behind.
95% of my congregation being affected by the Homeland Security. We have 300 families now currently at this day that they've been totally separated, and the children are crying and looking for their parents.
Ana Munoz, whose family came to America from Mexico, was fearful her father, Efrain, would soon be deported. He was marching with chains to dramatize his plight after federal agents detained him at his workplace.
He's the one that maintains us in the house. He pays everything. He brings us food and everything to the house. He supports us.
We are real people, that those of us who are undocumented and are being deported are family members, community members, students.
1 year later, drums are still beating and protesters continue to march. They say a dysfunctional immigration policy has gone from bad to worse.
1,100 people has been deported every day, and now we have 2 million, too many.
In March, bowing to pressure, the Obama administration announced it would look at whether immigration policies could be implemented more humanely within the confines of the law. But here in Chicago, advocates of reform insisted the White House must do more.
This is our home because we're paying rent here, we're living here, we're working here. We cannot do it if Barack Obama does not help and the Congress does not get together and finally, like normal people, just gather, talk, and make a difference and change what is going on.
We should point out that last year deportations dropped by about 10%. This evening, we're joined by three guests with different perspectives. Allison Barnard, political strategist with Latinos for Political Progress. Omar Duque, president and CEO of the Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And Oscar Chacon, executive director of the National Alliance of Latin American and Caribbean Communities. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
As we heard, the White House has just announced that it is promising a more humane approach on immigration and deportations. Allison, is that going to significantly help?
I think that if the response of the community is, if the community is responsive to this, then they may. They might feel at this time it's too little, too late.
You know, I think we need to be clear about what we're talking about when we talk about deportations. I mean, clearly there's 1,200 deportations, I believe, every day or every week. But, you know, when we talk about deportations, we need to look at, you know, who are these people that are being deported? If the person has committed a serious crime, I believe that yes, they should be deported. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is people who the only crime that they committed was coming into this country in an unauthorized way. Those are the people that we're really trying to help and advocate for. Those are the people who are head of households, who are parents, who are being torn apart from their families, and that's a very significant issue.
Although the federal government does say that more than half of those deported are convicted criminals.
No, it's incorrect.
That's what Homeland Security says.
Actually, Yale, just published a very revealing study. Nearly 90% of the people who are being deported are actually people whose only infraction to the law is to be residing in the U.S. without a visa. Right. Here comes the caveat. The 1996 law, which is now what we have in place, actually criminalized actions such as coming back in for a second time as without authorization. So a lot of the people that are branded criminals are only branded criminals because the 1996 law made them criminals as a result of second offenses in terms of immigration law. I mean, the reality is that the vast majority of the people being sent back home are not even people who just came in, but people who have histories, lives, I mean, in this country, children born in the U.S. that are being deported. And again, I mean, I think that the figure is actually 1,200 a day. Yeah. And nearly 34,000 people detained per night. I mean, this is unprecedented in our history, and we are spending incredible amount of taxpayers' resources to do this. The last 3 fiscal years, something in the average of $18 billion a year. So it's really staggering.
Well, that's just what we're spending, but the overall economic impact that the deportations have had on our country is absolutely staggering. It amounts to about $2.6 trillion a year in lost economic activity that we're seeing as a result of the rate of deportations today.
Well, we're talking about figures. The latest figures from the Justice Department show that even though President Obama deported more people than any other president, that those numbers have fallen off over the past few years. What's going on here? Is this a softening of policy or something else, Allison?
The people speaking out and they're saying stop the deportations, I think that the government is hearing the voices of the people that we see marching and is trying to focus on the dangerous criminals, not the people who have re-entered. And I think that it's a possibility that they see election time is coming and they want to count on the voters, the Latino voters, to come out and vote for them. So it's possible that they have dialed back a little bit to say, okay, they can't say that we're soft on deportations, but that we are going to try and make a difference.
Is President Obama in kind of a hard spot here?
Yes.
On the left, he's being pressured by the Latino community. On the right, he's being pressured by Republicans who want him to do more. He seems to me kind of caught in the middle.
I agree.
I think that there is an interesting thing to mention. I mean, for the past 12 years, the common wisdom that has prevailed suggests that if the president, or the Democrats for that matter, can prove that they can be tough on immigrants, that then Republicans will come and play ball. The reality is it doesn't matter how hard the president or Democrats at large have been on immigrants, there is no sign that we are going to see major breakthroughs in terms of legislation. So many of us believe that the logic is mistaken, that there is really no much credibility to the argument that if they deport people like never before, that Republicans all of a sudden will come and say, okay, let's do reform.
Exactly.
It hasn't happened. And I think that that's partly the frustration that you see, especially from Latinos across the U.S. And it is correct. I mean, we are in the moments before the next electoral cycle, and I think it is a concern that many people will decide to stay home because they're so frustrated with both parties, and in this case with President Obama in particular.
I think enforcement and securing the border is a false issue. If you look at the Senate bill that passed last year, and if you look at what we've done on our southern border already, It is as militarized as this border has ever been. The legislation that passed out of the Senate placed a great emphasis on border security. And if the Republicans are saying, well, we want to look at security first and we want to, they have it. They've had it in terms of what this administration has done by militarizing the border. They've had it by what has been happening with deportations. They have it with what is in the Senate bill, and yet we still see no inaction. We still see inaction, and that's just, that's a travesty.
This remains a very divisive issue. At a recent event hosted by the Illinois Business Immigration Coalition, state politicians and corporate executives gathered to talk about the impact of immigration reform on the business world.
While that discussion was going on, opponents protested outside.
I would not have been elected governor without strong support from the Hispanic, the Asian, and Eastern European immigration community. It's time that we address a problem that's been lingering for too long. We have 12 million people who have contributed to our society. We need to make them legal. We need to make them be able to enjoy what all of our ancestors have been able to enjoy.
How can you make everybody else who break the law go to jail, and when they break the law, there is no jail? When they give amnesty, they're taking jobs away from those people in my community that cannot get a job. You get them a job, you allow them to get free college. People who live right here in America can't get free college.
Two sides of a very divided debate. What do you make of protesters who talk about jobs and amnesty and free college and say immigrants may get these benefits while natural-born Americans are still struggling?
It's a false dichotomy. I mean, the reality is, if you look at how inequality has grown over the last 3 decades in the U.S., definitely it is true, that we could benefit all from having greater access to opportunity. But to argue that immigrants are the source of this problem is really to scapegoat the weakest link in our social fabric. Immigrants have actually contributed greatly, not only to wealth generation, but to the well-being of many Americans. Imagine what would we pay for tomatoes or lettuce, if we didn't have immigrant labor present in the economic equation. So I think it is important to understand inequality and the consequences of it, which do inflict social pain on broad segments of the population, is a real issue. And we all should be tackling those issues as well. But again, to suggest that immigrants who have already been here, who have been contributing to the tax base of the country, are the ones to be blamed, I think it's just to look at the wrong target for the ills that affect us all.
But doesn't it become more divisive because the economy has been so weak the last few years, and so many Americans are insecure about their own finances?
It's a false argument, and I agree with what Oscar said. The Congressional Budget Office, an independent group that looks at the economic impact of legislation, did a study on the Senate bill that passed last year that says that in the next 10 years, passing comprehensive immigration reform will add $1.5 trillion to the U.S. economy and reduce the deficit by $1.2 trillion. Unfortunately, because of what we've gone through and because of where the arguments have gone, they're rooted, in my opinion, in fear. And I think there's this fear of the unknown. There's this fear of the other.
There's a fear of someone else taking my job or getting the job that I want.
Right, when in reality, immigration actually adds to the U.S. economy. It always has. If we look at our country, if we look at our nation's history, immigration has always added to our economy. The Congressional Budget Office says that immigration reform will do the same, yet for some reason or another, we still can't get over that hump.
Now, when we talk about this, Republican House Speaker John Boehner said he was hell-bent on passing an immigration bill at first. Now there seems to be some sway there, but top-ranking Republicans and Democrats both say that it looks like there will be a bill on the floor sometime this summer. Do you think this will happen?
It's the midterm elections. It's the idea that they want to court the Hispanic vote. Right now, Hispanics are 10% of the population, and only 5% of them are voting. And mostly because the Hispanic population, the largest population of Hispanics in the United States are Mexican Americans, but their average age is only 25 years old. and throughout across the board, 25-year-olds in general are not voting. They need to bring out these voters if they want to bring out the younger voters. The number one issue for young Hispanic voters is immigration. They want to bring out those voters for their midterm elections. Without those voters, there's going to be a lot of changes in Washington that some people are not going to like.
You know, I'm hopeful that a bill will come. I think a lot of work has been done with individual members of the Republican caucus, with some members of the Democratic caucus who have been on the fence. I'm hopeful that something will be done because the alternative, to me, unfortunately, is just absolutely unacceptable.
Some political analysts in Washington are suggesting there is a window right after the Republican primaries and before the midterm elections, which would be somewhere in the summer. A possibility there?
I think it's, again, I mean, good to hope, because there is a great deal of accumulation in terms of making it happen. But on the other hand, I think we need to also be realistic about the fact that immigration and the Latino vote, in as far as really being a turning factor for the 2014 elections, particularly from the Republican point of view, is simply not an issue that will necessarily move us, you know, to actually pass something. And I think it is important to understand, when you look at the long haul, there is no way to avoid the fact that if you want to become competitive, especially in presidential elections, you cannot afford to continue to alienate the Latino vote. But again, that does not necessarily factor in the same way in a midterm election, namely 2014. So I believe that there is a chance that there may be some action, legislatively speaking, but I am convinced that whatever action gets to be taken is going to be only barely enough to really fix everything that is so broken about our current immigration policy, which essentially is a past century policy for a 21st century. We need to really do a lot.
I believe it's the Democrats who depend on the Latino vote to hold on. The Republicans don't really have anything to lose in the 2014 elections.
But we've seen with the growth of the Latino population that not all Latinos vote democratically. I mean, there are certain factions who espouse policies on both sides.
Well, I think the divisiveness that's happening now, the parties have really made a dividing line between who is for the working man and who isn't. And I think that right now is reflecting and causing people who are generally Catholic and conservative to still not want to vote with the Republicans.
We saw the clip from the Illinois Immigration Business Coalition, which our organization is a member of, and that was a really powerful event because it was Republican leadership, constitutional Republican leadership in Illinois, members of Congress, members of the Republican Party of Illinois coming out and saying this is something that we support. And for me, the message was there is room in the Republican Party for this. There is room for immigration reform in the Republican Party.
We're going to get to another clip from that in just a moment. Farm, construction, and restaurant workers have long played a role in the debate over immigration and business. Lately, the focus has shifted to high-skilled workers now in high demand. This is what Caterpillar CEO Doug Oberhelman had to say about that issue.
We have hundreds of competitors all over the world trying to take our jobs and our people and our customers. But we're competing for more than just customers today. We're competing for talent, global talent. Think about it. We educate and train scientists and engineers here in the United States. They get the greatest education, the best education in the world, and some of them are the smartest people in the world. But because of the extremely low H-1B visa allotments and green card backlogs, they can't stay here. So they take a great education, they take it back home, and we sit across the table and compete with them. I want them on my side to compete with all those that are out there.
Now, H-1B visas are specialized visas that allow U.S. companies to bring in highly skilled workers, engineers, computer scientists, and keep them in the U.S. for a period of up to 6 years. Now, there's a push underway to double or more than double the amount of those visas issued. What is the main issue here? Is America not producing a large enough skilled workforce, or is this a cost issue?
I mean, I can tell you my perspective. I mean, I think that there is an argument to be made that there is lots of talent outside the U.S. that we would want in the U.S. But on the flip side, I can also tell you that the fact that there are so many kids graduating from college who aren't necessarily fitting with what the employment market needs It's more a reflection of a failure in terms of our overall education policy. And so getting more talented people to come is a shortcut to a larger problem. I mean, the problem is fixing our educational system in a way in which we are producing talent at home based on reforming our educational policy. And again, you were talking earlier about the divisions, that this causes. I can tell you for sure that it is not true that most of the H-1B visas are being actually obtained by U.S. companies. It turns out that 2 temporary employment agencies control the majority of the H-1B visas that are actually being granted right now.
But on the higher skilled visas and these companies wanting more, is it a question that they really need this immigrant labor, or that they want to pay it less than they pay the Americans?
I think there's no question that our companies, especially as we compete more and more in a global economy, need the very best and the very brightest. And I agree with what Oscar is saying, is that we need to look for that best and brightest, for that talent from within, but also from abroad as well, because that is also diversity, that brings diversity of thought, diversity of talent as we compete on the global market. The beautiful thing about immigration reform in this movement is that it is both about high-skilled and low-skilled, because it is all about moving the economy forward.
And we should point out that this is not strictly a Latino issue, especially here in Chicago.
No, it's not. We have the people coming, and as they said in the tape, there were people coming from Asia to work. They're coming to study here, and they're getting a fine education, and we're sending them back home with this fine education. And we need to utilize, we've made an investment into these students who have studied here. It's time that we utilize these resources that we have in these students.
Some would argue unemployment is still high here. Why let foreign workers in? Why not train Americans to do these high-skilled jobs?
Because there are still thousands and hundreds of thousands of jobs that are going unfilled right now because we don't have the talent pool to meet those jobs. One answer is going abroad. Another answer is improving our educational system so that we're training our own students here in Chicago, in Illinois, across our country to fill those jobs. And we're just not doing that.
But isn't it a fact that these high-skilled immigrants are paid less when they come here?
It is sadly a fact. I mean, actually, this is proven. I mean, it's not a matter of opinion. I mean, if you compare what an engineer or a computer scientist from India, gets to be paid when they are employed via a temporary employment agency by Google or Microsoft, they are making, at least 40–50% less.
So these companies are getting lower paid wages.
They are, but the part of the clip that we missed, the part of Caterpillar's CEO speech that morning was talking about, he also made the point that as we're educating these engineers that come, to this country, it's not only about the visas, but it's also about providing them with, a green card upon graduation. That changes that dynamic, because now you're talking to a legal U.S. resident, and you will eliminate that earnings gap.
Mm-hmm. With these H-1B visas, they are fairly restrictive from what I understand, too. People are limited in where they can go and what they can do and how long they must work for a certain company.
One of the problems with the entire temporary employment visas is that they are often tied to the employer. So if I am a foreigner coming to the U.S. under one of these visas, I obtain the visa via whoever is employing me. And so I don't have much flexibility. I may well be talented, but I am tied to an employer. This is an area where we also need to revamp our immigration policy. We often reduce the immigration policy debate about the people without status, but it is far more than that. And the area of temporary employment visas is one area where a lot of reform needs to be made.
So folks who come here on these visas are basically married to a single company at a lower than average pay rate for up to 6 years.
Sadly, very often the case.
A lot of these companies, Google, Facebook, Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett, been very high profile in pushing for immigration reform. Why haven't they been able to convince Republicans to back it when traditionally corporate America is aligned with the Republican Party?
I think the extreme parts of the political parties are using fear to keep the voters on edge, and they're not able, the congressmen and people in Washington are too afraid to make these to make these steps outside for fear that the extreme parts of the party will vote them out. I think that the divisiveness has gone to an extreme, and I think that the potential voters, as I said, our young people, what they see now is so much inaction that they don't see that their vote counts. And so this extreme differences, the fear on both sides is really frozen everything in place, and not even Warren Buffett can budge anybody.
Yeah, I think were it not for fringe factions of the Republican Party, this bill, Speaker Boehner would have already been able to call this bill to a vote, and it probably already would be law.
You're talking about the Tea Party.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important to point out that, yes, I agree that it is a minority in terms of numbers, within the Republican Party. But sadly, they were let in back in the early 1990s into the Republican Party, and they've taken over the House.
Yes.
I mean, to the point that they set, the position of the Republican Party. I wish there were more Republicans like Jeb Bush, who recently said that crossing the border without a visa is an act of love. When a parent doesn't have a way of putting food on the table, that's an act of love. You don't hear, frankly, not even Democrats saying that kind of thing. So I wish there were more Jeb Bush in the Republican Party and beyond.
We are seeing some movement, though. Even in Illinois, Congressman Aaron Schock and Adam Kinzinger have both softened their positions on immigration, basically wanting to develop a path to legalization. Will that make a difference?
I think absolutely it will make a difference. Every single vote counts, and I think we're talking about if the bill actually does come to the floor, and there's been some action in Congress to try to get a discharge petition to encourage the Speaker to bring the bill to the floor, I think that if it comes to the floor, there is already enough support with Democrats and Republicans that have come out and said that if this came out for a vote, that they would vote for it. So every single vote matters. The question now is, why can't we get it on the floor?
Mm-hmm. Senator Durbin here in Illinois has a slightly different worry, and that is that the big companies such as Google and Microsoft are only interested in the high-skilled. He sent a letter out saying, wait, we need a comprehensive immigration reform, not just a tweak of the law to help the big rich companies.
And that's what's so key about the bill that passed the Senate, and that's why a path to citizenship is an absolute necessary component to whatever bill comes out. Nancy Pelosi has said that she wants this bill so much, and she's willing to compromise on a lot of different issues, but she will not compromise on a path to citizenship because that addresses that fact. That gets to those 12 million people that are in this country that have been, for decades, that have been lost and have been, stuck in the shadows.
And those divisive groups use phrases like path to citizenship, and they flip it around and they say, oh, amnesty, and people get all bent out of shape, and now we're at another roadblock. But honestly, path to citizenship is the way to increase economics, political, to make progress on all of those fronts.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. We're out of time. That wraps up the special presentation of In the Loop. We'd like to thank our guests, Allison Bernard, Omar Duque, and Oscar Chacon. I'm Barbara Pinto.
And I'm Chris Bury. Until next week, good night.
Good night.